Hello, and welcome to My Week in Baseball. I'm your host, Phil Estruth Harrison. You're listening to episode number 5. This episode is published as a podcast on Buzzsprout and Spotify, and is also available in a video version on YouTube. Today's topic is relief pitchers, specifically closers. We'll talk about some of the all-time greats and the not-so-greats. Of course, we'll also have a timely Blimerick, our blast from the past, and the cap of the day. So let's get right to it. First, we'll start off with the cap of the day. And those of you watching on YouTube will notice that this is not a Major League Baseball cap. This cap is dark gray and has a brown potato on the front with kind of a smiley face, a laughing potato. It's really pretty silly. And on the back of the cap, I'm going to turn it around. If you're watching, it has in script letters, cursive letters, written out Papas Grandes. So Papas Grandes means the big potatoes, and that is the name of my fantasy baseball team. Their reason for that name is a favorite player of mine, Papa Grande, also known as Jose Valverde. So Jose Valverde was a relief pitcher who pitched for 12 years for Arizona, Houston, Detroit, and the New York Mets. Now, one thing I liked about him, his nickname, Papa Grande, the big potato in his case, was a way of jokingly describing his physique, which did not look as athletic as you might have expected for a pretty successful relief pitcher. Anyhow, Jose Valverde, the big potato, in his career, he was quite successful with 288 saves, which is number 33 on the all-time list, not bad. And he saved those games in 325 chances. So if you do the math, he was successful just under 89% of the time, 88.6% to be exact. It's not quite top tier, as you'll learn about a little later in the broadcast, but it's pretty good. He did lead the league in saves 3 times. He had 20 or more saves 6 times. He was a 3-time All-Star and a Cy Young top 10 finisher twice. In 2007, he had 47 saves for the Diamondbacks, leading the National League. In the following year, 2008, 44 saves for the Houston Astros, who at that time were also in the National League. So that was his second league leading year. And his third and final year to lead the league in saves was 2011, 49 saves for the Detroit Tigers, this time in the American League. And that was his best Cy Young finish. He finished 5th in the Cy Young voting, which really is quite good for a relief pitcher. They tend not to get a lot of love in Cy Young voting, the feeling being that they don't pitch the number of innings and determine the outcome of as many games as a starting pitcher who might pitch, a reliever might pitch 60, maybe 70 innings. A starting pitcher, could pitch upwards of 200, although in recent years, it's more in the 150, 160 range. Anyhow, continuing on with Jose Valverde, Papa Grande, his career earned run average was 3.27, and a career whip, walks and hits per innings pitched, was 1.20, which is pretty solid. His strikeouts per 9 for his career was 9.9, which, given that he played, in the 2010s, in the earlier 2000s, was pretty good. Today, you're going to expect that from a closer, but back then, that was pretty solid. And his FIP, his fielding independent pitching, was 3.66 compared to his ERA 3.27. So those are pretty close. That's about roughly a 0.4 difference between his earned run average and his fielding independent pitching. And so that would tend to tell you that he pitched roughly what you would expect him to do as far as his earned run average. Just for clarification, FIP is a measure of pitchers' effectiveness at preventing home runs, walks, hit batters, and also their ability to strike people out. So what you're really trying to do with FIP is to measure the expected earned runs you would likely get from that pitcher based on the things the pitcher can control. Obviously, the pitcher can't control what happens on a batted ball that's hit on the ground, whether a fielder fields it or not, so on. Anyway, also his career opponent batting average was 210, which is pretty solid. Pretty good relief pitcher. Again, not quite top tier, but the other thing about him is you didn't have to quite pay a top tier salary for him either. So very good. Arguably his best year, or the year with the Tigers is the one I'm going to point out here, was 2011. His opponent batting average was just 198, which is awesome. He had earned an average of 224. And in that case, his FIP was 355, which is surprising to me. It's so based on the things he could control, he was expected to have an ERA of 1.3 higher than he actually did. His ERA was only 2.24. So that's kind of interesting, that because his career numbers are so close between his FIP and his earned run average, that this 1 year is quite different. One thing that was especially good about 2011 for Jose Valverde is that he had 100% success rate in converting saves. He had 49 save opportunities, 49 games saved. And that was the only year where he had 20 or more saves that he was perfect. Now, he had a season or two early in his career where he saved like 8 games and he was a perfect 8 for 8. But I'm not going to really count that. In 2011, he did have a walk rate of a little over 4, which I think is what makes that FIP higher than you might expect. But he allowed very few home runs, 0.6 home runs per 9, which is quite good for a reliever. And not many hits, 6.5 hits per 9 innings. So that means he didn't really have, well, with the walks, he still has a slightly over a runner per inning. And he was a fly ball pitcher. So in his career, his fly ball rate, or the way I would put it, it's ground outs over fly outs. So if a pitcher has 1.00, that means that they have an equal number of ground ball outs and equal number of fly ball outs. So if you're over 1, that means you're more of a ground ball pitcher. If you're under 1, that means you're more of a fly ball pitcher. And Valverde had a career 0.88. So tended toward the fly ball. Career 0.75, in 2011, 0.88. But he definitely tended toward the fly ball when he wasn't striking somebody out. All right, enough about Jose Valverde. I'm going to go on now and tell you a little bit about saves. Some of this you may already know, but I think it's good review because sometimes we tend to expect a save to work a certain way, and it isn't always that way. So one thing that I discovered in my research was that per Wikipedia, the save statistic was created by a journalist in 1959, a journalist named Jerome Holtzman, to measure the effectiveness of relief pitchers. The idea being that earned run average wasn't really a good indicator of how well a relief pitcher did, because sometimes there were runners on base when he came in. And win-losses, as we know, win-losses is not a great measure of pitcher success, because so much of that depends on what their team is doing. So the measure was invented or created in 1959 and officially adopted by MLB. They're a little slow sometimes. 10 years later in 1969. And then when you're looking at statistics, so really prior to 1969, if you're seeing saves, they've been retroactively determined after the fact, because in earlier years, there was no such thing as a save. So here's the other thing that's good to know. What are the rules for getting a save? I'll bet you think you know what they are, and you probably sort of do, but here are the official rules. So he's the finishing pitcher in a game won by that player's team. Also, the person is not the winning pitcher, because you can't get both a win and a save. So if you come in the late innings, your team comes from behind, you win the game, you're going to get the win. You're not going to also get a save. And then it has to be one of, the pitcher has to pitch at least a third of an inning. So you do have to get somebody out. That seems obvious. You have to get at least one person out. And then you've got to meet one of the following conditions, not all of them, just one of them. You enter the game with a lead of no more than 3 runs and pitch at least 1 inning. Okay. Your team's ahead by 3 runs or less, and you pitch at least 1 inning, you get a save. Or you enter the game with the potential tying run either on base, at bat, or on deck. So that's really the idea that you might not pitch the whole inning. You might just even get 1 out. But if at the time you come in and you finish the game and your team wins, the tying run is on base, at bat, or on deck, you qualify for a save. So that's that same kind of thing, more or less. You're not ahead by more than 3 runs. It's kind of that same kind of thinking. And the final possibility, which is the least common these days, is that you pitch at least 3 innings. So you only have to meet one of those qualifications, right? This means you could pitch 3 innings. Your team could be ahead by a ton. You could be ahead 10-2. But if you pitch the last 3 innings of the game and hold the lead, your team wins, and you're not the winning pitcher, you're still going to get a save. And I do remember that being more common in the past, that pitchers did get 3 inning saves. Your best relief pitcher would come in and pitch the 7th, 8th, and 9th. It is really much more recently that we've had this specialization where closers only come in the 9th. And I'd say, thankfully, more recently, now sometimes that best pitcher is actually pitching in the 7th or the 8th, or occasionally earlier in the game with the game actually on the line. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I think that's interesting just to think about, what are the ways that you can officially get a save. So I'm going to now skip ahead to our blast from the past. This week's blast from the past is another reliever, Heathcliff Slocumb. Now, if you're a Red Sox or a Mariners fan, you might remember him. He was traded from the Red Sox to the Mariners in 1997, and the Red Sox came out okay in this. They got Derek Lowe, who wasn't too bad, and Jason Varitek, who was their starting catcher for a while. Anyway, Slocumb had a 3-year stretch from 1995 through 1997, where he was especially effective, saving 32, 31, and 27 games. He had career 98 saves and finished number 166 in the career leaders, at least currently, that's where he stands. His overall stats, though, were not especially good. And this is what I kind of find interesting about him. His opponent batting average career was 263, which is, that's that's kind of marginal. He had a horrible whip, putting runners on base, of 1.58. 1.58. He had, if you were to really round up, he's got close to 2 runners on base every inning he pitches that he's putting on. These aren't inherited runners. His career earned run average is 4.08, and he had a career walk rate of 5.1 per 9 innings. Well, that is an exceptionally high walk rate, and that will explain why some of his other career stats were not so terrific. So there's a great quote from one of the Boston writers at the time he was traded from the Red Sox to the Mariners. And this may be a bit of a paraphrase. I'm not certain it's an exact quote, but it's very, very close to this. Boston's trading him now. Is Boston going to miss him? Here's the quote. He referred to Slocumb's pitching as that special kind of torture known as Heathcliff Slocumb. And I'm sure that that's due to his propensity to put runners on before miraculously getting the save. He was walking guys right and left. He really was not that great of a pitcher, but he did manage to convert the saves. And so when I started looking into this, doing a little research, I found it remarkable that he had 98 career saves. And I thought, he puts a lot of guys on. How good was he at actually converting those save chances? So he had 98 saves in 98 career save opportunities over 10 seasons. He successfully saved 100% of the games in which a save was available. And I thought, wow. And that really got me curious about what other closers were looking like, because to me, that sounded like, gosh, I can't imagine there's very many closers who successfully saved every game they had an opportunity to save, even the very best ones. So let's take a look at that next. We're looking at top closers now, and I'm just going to name initially the top 5, and we'll talk through how successful they were at converting the saves. Now, certainly all of these people I'm mentioning had far more saves than Heathcliff Slocumb, and considerably more even than Jose Valverde. But let's just take a look. So the number 1 saves leader career all-time currently is Mariano Rivera. He had 652 saves in 684 chances for a 95.3% success rate, which is awesome. Arguably, maybe not even arguably, even if you aren't a Yankees fan, I think most people would agree Mariano Rivera was the best closer of all time. And he's successfully converting those save opportunities just over 95% of the time. So that's a way to look at a top tier guy compared to when I mentioned Jose Valverde earlier. He successfully closed 89% of his opportunities, which is quite good, but it's not quite the top tier. So number 2 on the all-time list, and we're just going through the top 5 here, Trevor Hoffman. He saved 601 games in 629 opportunities for a career successful save percentage of 95.5, nearly identical to Rivera. They're both a little over 95%. Number 3 on the list, and the number of saves really drops now. You're going from over 600 for Hoffman and Rivera now to Lee Smith is number 3 at 478 saves in how many opportunities? 478. Lee Smith, yet number 3 in the all-time saves leaders, saved 100% of the chances he had. So that surprised me right off. It's like, oh, maybe this isn't as uncommon as I thought it would be. Number 4 on the list, Francisco Rodriguez. He had 437 saves and saved 87% of his games. Now, the interesting thing about Rodriguez is that he actually, even though he's number 4 in all-time saves, he holds the record for most saves in a single season, 62 with the 2008 Los Angeles Angels. And he had 7 blown saves that year. So he was 62 out of 69. Number 5 on the list is John Franco, 424 career saves. And he, how many opportunities? 424 saves, 425 opportunities. He had only 1 blown save in his entire career. So he's at 99.8%. So here, just in the top 5, you've got Lee Smith at 100% and John Franco, who only blew 1 save with well over 400 opportunities. So 1 perfect and 1 nearly perfect. So it made me look a little further down the list. And I just looked through the top 20. Dennis Eckersley, who's number 7 in all-time saves, he had 100% success. Jeff Reardon at number 11, 100%. Randy Myers at number 14, 100%. And John Wetland at number 16, 100%. So those 4, plus Lee Smith, that's 5 of the top 20 who successfully saved 100% of their opportunities. And John Franco really close, so nearly 6. And as I looked down the list, I didn't keep counting after the top 20, but even just doing an eyeball check on the all-time saves leaders compared to the save opportunities, which are listed in the stats as SVOs, there were a fair number. There's a fair number of them, even who have, a couple hundred or more saves, who were perfect. The two guys right next to Heathcliff Slocumb on the all-time list were Mike Schooler, who I don't particularly remember. He was a perfect 98 for 98, just like Slocumb. And then Norm Charlton, who I talked about in a previous episode from the Phillies and the Mariners, two of his main teams. He was perfect 97 for 97. So Slocumb and the guy he's tied with, Mike Schooler, and the guy right below him in the list, Norm Charlton, were all perfect. So it's not as uncommon as I initially thought that it might be, which I just found that really interesting to research that and look into a little bit. One thing that I think could make a difference. Now, certainly, if you save less games, if you had less opportunities, there's probably a higher likelihood that you would be able to save all your games. When you're getting into the hundreds and hundreds of saves, the chances that you would have blown even one save opportunity seem like they would increase quite a bit. So you might have more likely to have this 100% success rate with fewer saves. But I think a lot of it has to do with closer usage as well. If your typical situation during the time that you were playing is that you were brought on to start the ninth inning with nobody on, your team's ahead. And maybe if you're lucky, you're on a particularly good team, maybe they tend to be ahead by 2 or 3 runs instead of just 1, which would make the save easier to get, right? Because if you're ahead by 3 runs and you give up 2, you still get the save, even though you didn't necessarily pitch particularly well. So if that was your use case, and there was a period of time there where that was very common. So I'm going to say probably started going that way in the 1980s, 90s, 2000s, really common. And then in more recent years, less so, because if that really is the best reliever on the team, it's not as uncommon now to bring that guy in and ask him to get 4 or 5, maybe 6 outs. Now, they very seldom pitch 3 innings, but they might pitch 1 1/3, 1 2/3. They're coming on the 8th with a couple guys on. But that definitely, if you're coming in those situations earlier in the game, or even in the 9th, but if you're coming in the situation where there are guys on, the chance of you blowing the save increases quite a bit. If you come in and there's a runner on third and your team is only ahead by 1 run, well, you can get the save by finishing the game and getting the rest of the outs. But if that guy scores on a sacrifice fly, a ground out, depending on how many outs there are when you come in, you didn't really pitch badly, but you're going to get stuck with a blown save. So your success rate is partially determined on how your manager uses you. Are they bringing you in with nobody on to start the 9th? That would definitely be an easier save to get than if they're bringing you on in the 7th or the 8th or even the 9th, but with runners on, runners in scoring position, it's going to be a tougher save to convert. Anyway, that's what I have to say about saves today. I'm going to go on now to our Blimerick. That's our baseball limerick that we have every broadcast. This time, it has to be about Heathcliff Slocumb. When called on for game-ending outs, Heathcliff Slocumb, he gave fans some doubts. But with a save on the line, he was perfect every time. So the fans then could both breathe and shout. Anyway, he did get the job done. He might have put you on the edge of your seat. He may have been that special kind of torture, as the Boston writer said. So that's what I have to talk about today. Join us next time, because honestly, what can be better than talking about baseball? Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Phil Eshtruth Harrison. We'll see you next time on My Week in Baseball.